Somewhere on a recording from the Isle of Wight, August 1970, you can hear Jimi Hendrix, playing to 600,000 people on a windy hilltop, call out to a small bald man in a brown work coat. "Turn it up, Charlie." The sound system Hendrix was playing through, the largest ever assembled, had been built by that man, Charlie Watkins, and a small crew from a former pickle factory in Lambeth. Then Charlie decided the world he'd helped create was becoming dangerous and quietly walked away. Horn-loaded competitors made his PA obsolete. Japanese digital engineering turned his tape echo machine into a relic. Today, the factory at 66 Offley Road is a laundry. No plaque marks the door. This is the story of an East End accordion player with no engineering training who invented the modern PA system, powered every major British festival from 1967 to 1973, and gave Hendrix, Bowie and Joplin a voice that could reach 500,000 people. Then went home to play the accordion while the industry he'd built carried on without him. Not through defeat. Through a quiet retreat and a world that kept getting louder using the system he'd designed. Chapter 1. The Accordion Player and the Black & Decker. The story begins, as the best ones do, with a man who had no business inventing anything. Charles Watkins was born on the 28th of June 1923 in London's East End into a working-class family with no connection to electronics, engineering or the music industry. At 15, in 1938, he joined the Merchant Navy. For the next 7 years he crossed the Atlantic in unarmed convoys during the Battle of the Atlantic. Those grey, grinding crossings where the survival rate among merchant seamen was roughly 1 in 4. It was aboard ship that Charlie discovered the accordion. A steward played one in the mess room, and Charlie thought, "That's lovely. I'll have to get one of them." He survived the war. He came home. He became a professional accordionist, gigging around London, typically teaming up with a guitarist. And it was here, in the back rooms of pubs and dance halls across South London, that the seed of everything was planted. The guitars couldn't be heard. They were lovely instruments, Charlie thought, but acoustically invisible next to a saxophone or an accordion. Band leaders knew it. Instead of hiring a guitarist, they'd hire another horn player. Charlie put up with it for years before a thought crystallised that would reshape British music. I can do something about that. In 1949, Charlie and his brother Reg, a cabinet maker by trade, opened a record shop in Tooting Market. By 1951, they'd moved to a proper premises at 26 Balham High Road, selling guitars and accordions alongside records. Charlie began tinkering with amplifiers in the back room with no training, no qualifications, and no particular embarrassment about either. He called himself a terrible engineer and a shopkeeper with a Black & Decker in the back room. His first amplifiers, built around 1952 with electronics collaborator Arthur O'Brien from Premier Radio on Tottenham Court Road, were about 4 watts, AC/DC. He sold roughly 20. When he heard a guitarist had been electrocuted by a competitor's amplifier, he recalled every unit he'd sold. People were dying from electric shock in those days, especially down in Battersea, where they were still running DC mains. Charlie never pretended to be something he wasn't. He relied on hired engineers to execute his ideas. Bill Purkis, who'd go on to design the Copicat and the tremolo circuits. Norman Sargent, who'd developed the slave amplifiers that changed live sound forever. Charlie's philosophy on managing these boffins was characteristically blunt. Grab them while they're new, because they'll churn out everything they've had bottled up for years. After 6 months, he said, everything slows down and they start telling you mustn't rush things. The family dimension mattered. Reg opened a guitar factory at Caxton House in Chertsey, Surrey in 1957, producing the Watkins Rapier, the second British-made solid-body electric guitar, beaten to market by the Dallas Tuxedo by a week or two. A third brother, Sid, joined Reg at Chertsey. Charlie's wife June remained devoted throughout and would continue running the business long after Charlie stepped back. The split was clean. Reg was the guitar man, Charlie was the audio innovator. and Charlie was honest about the boundary. He believed that the person who plays the instrument should design it, and he played the accordion, not the guitar. Physically, he was a small, balding man who looked completely out of place among rock stars, typically wearing a brown work coat with a soldering iron in his hand. He was always Charlie, never Mr. Watkins. His shop became a hangout where teenagers could drift in on rainy Saturdays without being chased out. Musicians from a completely different generation loved him, possibly because he was quite unlike the judgmental parental figures they were used to, and he was blisteringly honest about his own tastes. It wasn't for love of rock and roll, he said. He didn't want their bloody rock and roll, never liked it, and didn't like it now. Which makes what happened next all the more remarkable. Chapter 2. A Bit of Bad Engineering. In 1958, Charlie heard about the Italian singer Marino Marini's technique of linking two reel-to-reel tape recorders together to create vocal echo on Cum Prima. It was, Charlie said, like a bell that rang in his head. He recruited Bill Purkis, who designed the entire unit from scratch in 3 months. The result was the Watkins Copycat, a compact box, roughly 12 by 8 inches, containing an endless loop of magnetic tape travelling continuously across a record head and 3 playback heads. Each head picked up the signal at a different delay interval, a maximum of about 300 milliseconds. Select heads individually or in combination via push-button switches and you got different echo patterns. Feed the delayed signal back to the record head, the sustain control, and the repeats cascaded into infinity. Before the Copicat, recreating tape echo required 2 full-sized reel-to-reel machines linked together. Expensive, bulky, completely impractical for any working musician who had to load his own van. The Ray Butts Echosonic in America had built echo into a guitar amplifier, but fewer than 70 were ever made. The Binson Echo Rec from Italy used a magnetic disc instead of tape and cost significantly more. The Copicat was the first compact, self-contained, affordable tape echo machine in the world. Priced at £38 10 shillings in 1962, it put a studio-quality effect within reach of every guitarist who could scrape together the money. The first 100 units went on sale on a Saturday and sold out in a single day. Charlie went to open up, and the door burst open with the press of customers. The very first Copicat was sold to Johnny Kidd. Guitarist Joe Moretti used it on their #1 hit, Shakin' All Over, in 1960. Arguably, the first famous recording shaped by the Copycat's sound. The first Melody Maker advertisement appeared in September of that year, coinciding with the Shadows' Apache ending its 5-week run at #1. Charlie admitted the Copycat's magic came partly from what he called a bit of bad engineering, a deliberate flaw he refused to identify. Every competitor who tried to copy the unit improved that flaw out of existence and lost the special quality. His travelling salesman, shown the prototype, said, "If you think I'm going to sell a monstrous bloody thing like that, I'd rather sell corn flakes," and walked out. Charlie mused later. I wonder if he realised the cost of his haste. The sensory experience of using a Copicat was inseparable from its sound. Tape loops had short lifespans. Serious gigging musicians would fit a new tape at the start of a gig and replace it during the interval. Worn tapes produced muddy, degraded echoes, though some players preferred that for the added character. The valve preamp added subtle saturation to the dry signal, even without the tape running. Crank the sustain knob far enough and the unit tipped into self-oscillation. Runaway feedback spiralling into otherworldly textures. The spacey Telstar sound that became a signature of the era. Real cats, incidentally, found the spinning tape irresistible and would wreck a loop given the slightest chance. The name itself was originally Copycat, but a photocopier held that trademark, so Charlie changed the Y to an I. By the early 1960s, Charlie told Guitar Player magazine he was selling approximately 1,000 Copycats per month. The solid-state Mark IV became the biggest-selling variant, with hundreds of thousands produced across its run. Robert Fripp used one, Rory Gallagher used one, Ritchie Blackmore used one in Deep Purple's early years. Brian Robertson of Thin Lizzy ran 2 Copicats as preamps into Marshall super leads. The tone captured on Live and Dangerous. Dub reggae producers discovered that the self-oscillation capabilities produced authentic dub effects. Noel Gallagher used a Copicat. Jamie Cook of Arctic Monkeys used a valve model recording Suck It and See. Jeff Tweedy of Wilco. Mike Campbell of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. The list runs across decades and genres, from 1960s beat to 21st century indie. And then there was the association everyone assumed. The Copycat is popularly linked to Hank Marvin's Shimmering Shadows sound, and WEM even produced a budget model called the Shadow Echo bearing the band's name. But Marvin himself primarily used Miyazi Echomatic and later Binson Echo Rec units. The truth is more interesting. Thousands of amateur guitarists across Britain used Copycats to emulate the sound Marvin was actually getting from Italian machines. The Copycat didn't give the Shadows their echo. It gave everybody else the dream of it. The Copycat financed everything that came next. The profits from that spinning tape loop bought a factory, funded an engineering team, and gave Charlie the resources to solve a problem that was bigger, louder, and far more dangerous than making a guitar echo. Chapter 3. The Loudest Man in Britain. The problem was this. Wherever Charlie went, you couldn't hear the singer. There was nothing but dreadful PA. No fold-back monitors, just a vocalist with a Shure Unidyne or an old Reslo ribbon microphone and a hopeless system unchanged since the 1940s. The best available kit rarely exceeded 100 watts driving pairs of column speakers. When the Beatles played Shea Stadium in 1965, 4 Oltec amplifiers totaling 700 watts were completely drowned by a screaming crowd generating 135 decibels. That technological inadequacy was a key reason the Beatles quit touring altogether. Charlie's first PA attempt, in 1965, was a disaster. He built a system for the Byrds UK tour using 30-watt amplifiers. It failed miserably. David Crosby phoned the next morning with a verdict consisting largely of expletives. Rather than retreating, Charlie was galvanized. "This PA thing is harder than it seems," he said. "But I want to do it even more now after all that trouble." The breakthrough came through the WEMSL 100, a 100-watt solid-state power amplifier designed by Norman Sargent, based on a modified RCA transistor circuit. The innovation was amp slaving, connecting a main amplifier to an array of gain-match slaves via simple jack plug leads. Adjust the gain on the main amp and all the slaves followed. Up to 10 could be chained together. It was the world's first practical method of scaling PA power, and it was so simple that a roadie could set it up in minutes. Charlie made a critical speaker choice too. He selected the Goodman's Axiom 301, a hi-fi speaker with a soft, concentric dual cone that moved easily, producing a flatter frequency response ideal for the human voice. For vocals, Charlie explained, you needed gentle cones, touch them, and they moved. Most PA speakers at the time were stiff, punchy, designed for instruments. Charlie chose a speaker designed for music, played in living rooms, and pointed it at a field full of people. The WEM Audiomaster mixer completed the system, the first portable, purpose-built live mixing console. Charlie had designed a prototype he called Fred in 1963. His own designers condemned it as intolerable madness, and it spent 3 years in the coal cellar before re-emerging as the production Audiomaster in 1968, priced at £65. 5 channels, built-in spring reverb, per channel, EQ, and crucially, outputs for slave amplifiers. 2 Audiomasters could be chained for 10 channels. Mixer to slave amps to speaker columns. The architecture of every PA system used at every concert anywhere in the world today descends directly from this design. The Windsor Jazz and Blues Festival in August 1967 was the proving ground. Charlie approached promoter Harold Pendleton, owner of the Marquee Club, through his employee John Thompson, offering to build a 1,000-watt PA. Far more powerful than anything that existed. Pendleton agreed on one condition. Watkins did it for free and accepted full responsibility if it failed. The system used multiple SL-100 slaves and Goodman's loaded columns. Fleetwood Mac played their first ever public performance at this festival. And when Arthur Brown performed Fire, Charlie told his crew, when he does his scream, put it on full everything. The lot, full power, full reverb. Charlie could still hear that scream decades later. It was, he said, amazing. The police arrived. Charlie was arrested for disturbing the peace, accompanied by the Lord Mayor, the Residents' Committee and the Noise Abatement Society. He was defended in court by Quintin Hogg, the future Lord Hailsham, who would go on to become Lord Chancellor. The case was dismissed. Charlie noted the occasion with characteristic modesty. It was only 1,000 watts, and you'd use more than that on your foldback now. But at the time, nobody had ever heard anything like it. Well, except for Hitler at Nuremberg. He did even better than me. That 1,000 watts opened a door that would never close again. Within 2 years, every serious band in Britain was beating a path to a factory in Lambeth. Chapter 4. Turn it up, Charlie. The factory at 66 Offley Road, London SW9, in the Oval area of Lambeth, purchased in 1961 with Copicat profits, had previously been Sharwood's pickle and chutney factory, then a printing works. An air raid siren signalled the start and end of shifts. It became, for the next decade, the most important address in British live music. Sound on Sound described it simply as the place where modern PA was created. From 1967 to 1974, WEM held a virtual monopoly on large-scale live sound in Britain. For 5 or 6 years, Charlie recalled, any group or band who was serious about their sound had to use his slave PA system, and they beat a path to his door. The product range at its peak spanned amplifiers, the iconic V-front Dominator, the Westminster, the Clubman, speaker cabinets including the Super Starfinder 200, PA columns loaded with Goodman's drivers, Audio Master mixers, SL-100 slaves, and of course the Copicat in its ever-evolving variants. The amplifiers were positioned deliberately at the budget end. Charlie recognised the competition was fierce at the top with Vox, Selmer and later Marshall. His gear was well made, sounded great and easily undercut the prices of his competitors. It sold, as one historian put it, in countless thousands. The V-front Dominator. 17 watts, 2 EL84 output valves, 2 10-inch speakers in a distinctive angled cabinet designed to project sound upward from the floor, was the amp that launched careers. Just about every famous British guitarist either used one or coveted one. Noel Gallagher used a Dominator Mark III on Oasis's Definitely Maybe. David Gilmour paired WEM Super Starfinder 200 cabinets with high-watt heads for Pink Floyd's classic sound. Josh Homme of Queens of the Stone Age used a WEM ER40. But it was the festival years that turned Offley Road into legend, and the anecdotes from that period carry the warmth of an era that felt, to those inside it, like it might last forever. David Bowie frequented the factory. He wrote Space Oddity sitting at Charlie's desk. Charlie didn't mind him eating his fish and chips there, but he did have to tell him to take his bloody feet off the desk. He's a smashing bloke, Charlie added. Jimi Hendrix and Charlie shared bags of chips before gigs. At the 1970 Isle of Wight festival, Hendrix told him he couldn't hear himself, so Charlie dismantled part of the left PA stack and pointed 500 watts directly at his ear. On the recording, you can hear Hendrix saying, "Turn it up, Charlie." It was Hendrix's last UK performance. He died less than a month later. Mick Jagger personally tested Charlie's mixing at a rehearsal at the Odeon in Nine Elms. A guy who really had it in his head precisely what he wanted, Charlie said. A letter signed by all the Rolling Stones thanking Charlie for the Hyde Park sound. Stones in the Park, July 1969, 250,000 people, 1,500 watts, hung on the wall of the Balham shop for years. Mark Bolan wrote Charlie a book of poems in thanks. T-Rex's roadie helped assemble the Hyde Park system. Janis Joplin broke down into tears after WEM provided her Royal Albert Hall, PA, in April 1969. Charlie was flown to the Waldorf Astoria in New York to fix her PA problems. His last image of her, he had to get up at 4 a.m. to catch his flight back to London, and as he sat eating egg and bacon, there was Janis wandering around the swimming pool, a bit out of her head. She came over and he ended up feeding her bits of egg. She was starving. Nobody was looking after her. A month after that, she died. Roger McGuinn of the Byrds, the same band whose disastrous tour had galvanised Charlie in 1965, returned around 1968 to buy a £4,000 WEM system. He arrived with money wrapped in a tea towel, Dutch money, German money, pound notes. They sat drinking coffee and eating Dutch cheese while they counted it out. WEM even pioneered fold-back stage monitoring, by accident. Roger Chapman of Family grabbed a speaker during a gig, found it wasn't his vocal feed, and nearly threw it at Charlie. Charlie wired him a monitor. Chapman rolled up his trademark towel, stuck it underneath the speaker as a wedge, and the wedge monitor was born. Works manager Gordon Shepherd was nearly knocked unconscious when a Goodman's Axiom 301 speaker walked itself off an overhead shelf during slave amp testing and fell on his head. Works manager Sid Metherell gave 30 years of service to the company. John Thompson, formerly security at the Marquee Club, became Charlie's right-hand sound engineer and roadie. These were the people who built, tested, loaded, transported, rigged, and ran the sound for an entire generation of British rock and roll. Chapter 5. The Hill at Afton Down. The Isle of Wight Festival of 1970, held from the 26th to the 30th of August on Afton Down, was WEM's zenith. Attendance estimates range from 250,000 to as many as 600,000 or 700,000. The Guinness Book of Records once recognised it as the largest musical event in history. Charlie deployed a 5,000-watt PA system, the most powerful ever assembled. WEM 4x12. PA columns, 8x10 and 2x15 enclosures. Banks of SL100 slave amplifiers. Audio master consoles. And parabolic focusable reflectors mounted atop the stacks. A single 10-inch driver that could project frequencies between 1 and 3 kHz for 5 miles. The Who brought their own 2,000 to 3,000 watt WEM system. Pink Floyd contributed theirs. Bands pooled equipment in what Charlie called quite a family. The site sat atop a hill with prevailing wind blowing toward the stage, pushing sound backwards, the worst possible acoustic scenario. Hendrix performed poorly. His wah-wah pedal failed. He was ill and under stress. Everyone was very kind, Charlie recalled. Nobody criticised him because he was obviously under stress. Charlie collapsed from nervous exhaustion after 3 days and nights of non-stop work. One man in a brown work coat, keeping 600,000 people audible on a windy hilltop, running on nothing but tea and willpower. It was the summit. And the view from the summit, had Charlie paused long enough to take it in, showed everything that was coming. The festival's aftermath included the Isle of Wight County Council Act of 1971, banning overnight gatherings of more than 5,000 people without a licence. The era of the vast, anarchic, beautiful British festival was legislated out of existence almost overnight. The audience that had gathered on Afton Down, the biggest crowd Charlie would ever face, was also the last of its kind. But there was something else. Something Charlie noticed at Grangemouth in 1973 when he deployed his maximum configuration. 50 slave amplifiers, 5,000 watts, a constant 128 decibels. It was, he said, the only festival he didn't enjoy. The sound had become something other than music. They started calling it pollution, he said, which didn't go down well with him, especially when it might have been a little bit true. Chapter 6. The Man with the Better Box. Charlie consulted a Harley Street specialist. The specialist confirmed what Charlie already suspected. The volumes they were pushing could cause deafness. It didn't leave a very good taste in his mouth. The man who'd made rock audible was beginning to wonder whether audible was the same thing as safe. Violence at gigs escalated. Charlie was hit by a bottle at one event. There was a bloke with a knife at another. The audiences were changing. The festival scene, which had felt in its early days like something beautiful and communal, was curdling into something harder-edged and more dangerous. Charlie didn't romanticize it. He saw what he saw. But the threat that actually ended WEM's dominance wasn't a bottle or a noise complaint. It was a wooden box. Charlie named his nemesis, explicitly, Kelsey and Morris. They'd developed horn-loaded PA systems, W-bins, that were technologically superior to WEM's cone-based columns. The physics were simple and devastating. A horn-loaded cabinet focuses sound energy the way a megaphone does, projecting it further and more efficiently than a direct radiating cone speaker. Charlie's Goodman's axiom. 301s had been revolutionary when nothing better existed. They'd sounded beautiful, flat, warm, faithful to the human voice. But they scattered their energy in all directions. To fill a larger space, you simply added more of them, more slave amplifiers, more columns, more weight, more trucks on the road. The WEM systems scaled by brute force. Kelsey and Morris scaled by efficiency. Charlie understood the implications immediately. Their system was better than the W-bin, he said, and they were better than me. Although they were terribly heavy to carry, I could see what was going to happen. There they were, with a 500-watt box, against a great big WEM system, and it seemed like it was time for me to hang up my headphones. So, I just stopped. Bob Pridden, the Who's long-serving sound engineer, confirmed the technical limitation from the other side of the mixing desk. The WEM system just outgrew itself, he said. For every 1,000 watts, you only get about a couple of extra decibels. It really didn't cover big gigs like that. That's when you needed something with horns in it to project the sound. The mathematics of diminishing returns had caught up with Charlie's architecture. The system that had powered 600,000 people at the Isle of Wight couldn't evolve further without becoming impossibly large, impossibly heavy, and impossibly expensive to transport. The PA hire companies, Britannia Row, which Charlie later praised, and others, understood this. They invested in horn-loaded systems. They hired permanent sound engineers. They built fleets of trucks. The entire model shifted from bands owning their PA to bands hiring it. After a while, Charlie said, it all got too much for the bands. The systems got bigger, which meant another van on the road and another sound man, and gradually people started hiring and the whole thing changed. Charlie Watkins had invented the architecture of modern live sound, and the industry he'd created had evolved past him within a decade. Chapter 7. The Copicat's Last Tape. The PA business was gone by 1974. But the Copicat, that 12 by 8-inch box with the spinning tape, continued. And it's here that the competitive landscape tells the classic story of analogue craft. Meeting industrial-scale manufacturing. The Roland Space Echo RE201 arrived in 1974. It offered everything the Copicat did and more, a free-running tape transport that reduced wear, built-in spring reverb, 11 repeat modes, and greater reliability. It was Japanese precision engineering applied to a concept Charlie Watkins had pioneered 16 years earlier. The RE201 became the industry standard for tape delay through the late 70s and 80s. It didn't kill the Copicat overnight. Loyal users stuck with the warmth and the unpredictability of Charlie's design. But it took the professional market away. Then came digital. The Roland SDE 3000, introduced in 1983 at just over $1,000, became the professional standard used by Eddie Van Halen, Steve Vai, The Edge. The Boss DD2, released in December of the same year, was the world's first digital delay in stompbox format. Small, reliable, battery-powered, and instantly a mass-market hit. No tape to replace, no heads to clean, no self-oscillating spirals unless you wanted them. For most working musicians loading a van at midnight after a gig, the choice between a pristine digital box and a temperamental analog machine with a tape that needed changing at the interval wasn't a choice at all. The budget, Roland SDE 1000 at $499, filled studios. By the mid-80s, tape echo had been pushed to the margins, the province of purists, experimentalists, and dub producers who wanted exactly the imperfections that digital had engineered away. And it wasn't just the Copicat under siege. PV Electronics entered the UK market aggressively from its manufacturing base in Corby, England, offering high-quality CNC-manufactured amplifiers and PA equipment at prices that cottage industry British manufacturers couldn't match. The PV Bandit, conceived in 1980, became arguably the most famous solid-state amplifier ever built. HH Electronic, a British competitor founded in 1968 near Cambridge, whose IC100 had been more or less standard issue for British semi-professional bands. Entered receivership in 1984. If a company with HH's engineering pedigree and established customer base couldn't survive the Japanese import wave, a one-man operation in South London with a soldering iron and a roll of recording tape had no chance at all. Charlie had never built WEM for scale. He'd never pursued outside investment, never sought a corporate partner, never considered acquisition. WEM was a family business run from a factory bought with Copicat money, staffed by people Charlie knew by name, producing equipment designed by engineers he'd hired personally. The concept of scaling to compete with Roland or PV, companies with research laboratories, global distribution networks, and manufacturing capacity measured in millions of units, simply wasn't in his vocabulary. Whether that was principled independence or strategic limitation depends on your point of view. But it was entirely consistent with a man who'd always called himself a shopkeeper with a Black & Decker in the back room. Around 1974, Charlie paid off his staff, sold the Offaly Road factory, and moved into a smaller unit. The building, Sharwood's old pickle factory, the place where modern PA was created, where Bowie ate fish and chips and Hendrix shared bags of chips before gigs, eventually became a laundry. In 1982, the remaining WEM operations relocated to a small factory near Charlie's home in Upper Norwood, London, SE19. The Chertsey Guitar Factory, Reg and Sid's domain, also closed around 1982, ending the Wilson and Rapier guitar lines. There was no single catastrophic closure date, no dramatic final shift. The contraction was phased, measured, almost peaceful. Charlie simply decided he didn't have anything left he wanted to do. Chapter 8. The Shopkeeper's Last Invention. Charlie didn't stop working. He kept making copycats and specialist amplifiers on a cottage scale from his home in Upper Norwood, June beside him, as she'd always been. He pivoted to what he'd loved before rock and roll found him: accordions. He developed accordion amplifiers, the Songbird series, MIDI accordion systems, and new accordion designs. He even designed a wire stripping machine. On his website, around the year 2000, Charlie wrote with quiet defiance, "Everybody thought we were done and gone. Far from it. Might be a bit bruised and battered, but still in the running and endlessly working for the next breakthrough in electric music. It's just the breakthroughs don't come as easy as they did in the 60s, when it was all starting, what with all the digital high-tech and the rest of it. He tried very late to meet the digital age halfway. Around 2009, he developed the Copicat Gold, a digital unit emulating various classic echo patterns. A sound-on-sound reviewer noted it had come to market just a little late, now that there were other inexpensive, easy-to-use units available. The world hadn't waited for Charlie Watkins to go digital. It had gone digital without him, and the gap had closed years before he tried to cross it. Charlie worked into his 80s. He remained an active accordion player. In 2011, he received the Audio Pro International Lifetime Achievement Award for his groundbreaking approach to loudspeakers and PA for outdoor rock events, the only major formal recognition during his lifetime. No knighthood, No blue plaque, no museum exhibit. The man whose mixer-to-slave amp-to-speaker architecture is used at every concert and festival on Earth got a single industry award 44 years after Windsor. Charles Watkins died on the 28th of October 2014, aged 91, at his home in southeast London. No dramatic circumstances. He simply reached the end of a long, full life, surrounded by accordions and soldering irons. The tributes, when they came, said what should have been said louder and years earlier. Sound on Sound published a comprehensive profile in February 2015 based on previously unpublished interviews. Martin Newell of the Cleaners from Venus, who'd first walked into the Balham shop as a 14-year-old in 1967, wrote a personal essay that ended with a sentence that serves as well as any epitaph. The people who made Britain great weren't always those blokes on horses, with the feathered coal scuttles on their heads. Sometimes they wore brown work coats and had a soldering iron in their hand. Like Charlie Watkins. Chapter 9. What the Silence Sounds Like. The WEM brand technically still exists. The website, wemwatkins.co.uk, remains active, run by June Watkins. A license to produce Watkins guitar amplifiers and copycats was held by Ampfix in Devon, John Beer, who also supplied genuine WEM tape loops and Copicat parts, though the site now reads, due to retirement, all parts below while stocks last. Hiwatt released a WEM-branded Copicat preamp boost pedal in 2024. Not a tape echo, but a pedalboard recreation of the valve preamp circuit, sold for $79. No true tape-based Copicat is currently in production anywhere in the world. Software emulations exist. A Waves Factory plugin called Echo Cat attempts to capture the sound digitally. Vintage WEM products are collectible and rising in value. Early valve copycats from the early 60s fetch between £700 and £1,000. Custom copycats from the mid-60s sell for more. WEM Dominator amplifiers are highly sought after. Reproductions by Ampfix sell for approximately £2,800. PA equipment surfaces occasionally, but its attraction now is purely nostalgic. The Offley Road factory, 66 Offley Road, SW9, the place where modern PA was born, is a laundry. No plaque marks the door. No sign records what happened inside those walls. The Balham shop at 26 Balham High Road, where teenagers drifted in on rainy Saturdays, and where a letter from the Rolling Stones hung on the wall, is somebody else's premises now. The Chertsey Guitar Factory is gone. The Upper Norwood workshop where Charlie spent his final decades is quiet. Walk through any of those places today and there's nothing to tell you that the sound of the Isle of Wight, of Hyde Park, of Hendrix and Bowie, and Joplin and The Who was built here. That a man with no engineering training and a box of spinning tape changed what live music could be. That the architecture of every PA system at every arena and festival in the world descends from a design sketched by a shopkeeper in Lambeth who called his first prototype Fred and stored it in the coal cellar for 3 years. Charlie Watkins wasn't a businessman who failed. He was an inventor who succeeded beyond anything he'd imagined, decided the world he'd helped create was becoming louder and more violent than he could stomach, and quietly walked away to play the accordion. The industry he'd built didn't mourn his departure. It simply kept getting louder, using the system he'd designed, amplified by companies with deeper pockets and bigger factories, and no memory of who'd started it all. Somewhere on a recording from Afton Down, August 1970, you can hear Jimi Hendrix, a month from his death, playing to 600,000 people on a windy hilltop, calling out to a small, bald man in a brown work coat. "Turn it up, Charlie. Nobody's called since."